There are now 2 stays of execution of Joseph Paul Franklin, but now the state of Missouri has filed 2 appeals. KMOX's Michael Calhoun is live at the prison in Bonne Terre.
Bill, with 2 hours until midnight, you could say that anything can happen. The staff here at the prison has said they are still preparing to move forward at 12:01 a.m. The Attorney General's office, meantime, has filed 2 appeals. Now, the first stay has to do with the drug they intend to use, pentobarbital, and secrecy surrounding how it was manufactured. The second stay is related to the prisoner's claim of incompetence. Again, 2 appeals from the Attorney General's office in relation to those. Franklin shot and killed a man at a bar mitzvah in St. Louis County in 1977 and killed as many as 20 other people across the country. There is high security here at this prison as we wait in the parking lot, but there's not much activity other than security patrols happening under the haze of the amber lights outside of the main building here. Live at the State Correctional Center in Bonne Terre, Michael Calhoun, News Radio 1120 KMOX.
Breaking news, a federal appeals court in Missouri has just lifted a stay of execution for convicted serial killer Joseph Franklin.
KMOX News Time is 5:05. Good morning, I'm Doug McKelvin. It is mostly cloudy, 38, the wind chill 30 downtown at the Arch. A federal appeals court in Missouri has upheld the execution of white supremacist serial killer Joseph Paul Franklin, restoring the state's plans to kill Franklin just hours after the execution was blocked. Michael Calhoun has just filed this report from Bonne Terre.
Many hours after the scheduled 12:01 execution time, both stays vacated by the entire 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. One involving the lethal injection drug, the other involving his claims of incompetence. There are no victims, witnesses here, and the 2 witnesses for Joseph Paul Franklin have left. At the state prison in Bonne Terre, Michael Calhoun, News Radio 1120 KMOX.
KMOX News Time, 5:32.
Last night, 2 rulings to stay from 2 federal judges, and early this morning, both overturned by the entire 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. The first had to do with the drug being used with the execution, the second with the offender's claim of incompetence. Barring a U.S. Supreme Court intervention, this would clear the way for the execution of Joseph Paul Franklin, originally scheduled to occur at 1 minute after midnight. At the state prison in Bonne Terre, Michael Calhoun, News Radio 1120 KMOX.
Breaking news, the Supreme Court a short time ago denied an apparent final appeal from serial killer Joseph Franklin. His scheduled midnight execution, delayed by a series of legal maneuvers, could still be carried out sometime today.
Joseph Franklin's death sentence for terrorizing a St. Louis County synagogue and killing a man there in 1977 was finally carried out at 6:17 this morning. KMOX's Michael Calhoun was in the press witness gallery. He joins us live now.
Debbie, it was dark with light streaming in under the door through which we'd walked in. There were 2 levels of risers with seats. The heavy blue curtain was pulled back, and I glanced at my watch. It was 6:06. At 6:07, the lethal injection began. Franklin was alone in the chamber, a white sheet up to his neck, tubes and wires snaked out of a hole in the wall and up and under the sheet. He gulped, blinked, and his breathing slowed. There was a stillness in the gallery, the only sound the hum from the overhead vents and the squawk of a radio telling guards to open and then close the curtain and then open it again. An official in the room announced Franklin's death after the room was dark again. He had no last meal, no witnesses, and left no last statement. There were also no witnesses for the victim. Reporting live at the State Correctional Facility in Bonne Terre, Michael Calhoun, News Radio 1120 KMOX.
CBS News, I'm Frank Sedapani. A serial killer who may have murdered as many as 20 people in a killing spree decades ago has been put to death. The Supreme Court rejected Joseph Franklin's final appeal early this morning.
When the first doses of the drug were administered, he moved his mouth, gulped a couple of times, blinked a couple of times, and slowly the breathing in his chest faded.
KMOX reporter Michael Calhoun watched the execution at the state prison in Bonne Terre, Missouri.
In the viewing gallery where the state witnesses were, it was absolutely silent except for the hum of the air conditioner overhead. And there were no protests outside the correctional facility either.
Franklin targeted Jews and blacks in a string of attacks from 1977 to 1980. His victims included badly wounded Hustler magazine publisher Larry Flint.
KMOX News Time is 8:04. As you heard on CBS News, after 6 hours of delays, convicted serial killer Joseph Franklin has been put to death at the Missouri State Prison in Bonne Terre. We begin our series of reports with Brian Kelly in the KMOX newsroom.
The scheduled minute after midnight execution was originally put on hold yesterday afternoon after a circuit judge ruled that challenges to the state's lethal injection protocol must be resolved before Franklin could be put to death. Last night, another judge granted a second stay, ruling Franklin was mentally incompetent. But this morning, a federal appeals court overturned both stays, and at 5:20 this morning, the U.S. Supreme Court denied Franklin's final appeal. Moments later, Franklin was led into Missouri's death chamber. KMOX's Michael Calhoun was there and watched what happened next.
Brian, a heavy blue curtain was drawn halfway open by a guard, revealing Franklin on his back, a white sheet up to his neck, red straps visible on the sides, wires and tubes snaked out of a hole in the wall up and under the sheet. His hair was pulled back and his glasses slightly askew. At 6:07, the lethal injection began. Franklin opened his mouth and gulped a couple of times. At 6:08, he blinked. His breathing slowed. His mouth was now open. The gallery was silent. The walkie-talkie squawked, and a guard walked across, pulling the curtain closed. In the light peeking out around the edges of the curtain, I could see shadows moving around. And at 6:17, the order to reopen the curtain, 5 grams of pentobarbital, was enough. An official declared, quote, "Death has been confirmed. Shortly they will be closing the curtains again," end quote. The curtains were closed, and we were escorted out of the gallery to the front of the prison and handed a statement from Governor Nixon in which he asks Missourians to remember the victims of Franklin's many crimes. Live at the State Correctional Center in Bonne Terre, Michael Calhoun, News Radio 1120 KMOX.
Who was Joseph Paul Franklin? This is John Butler in the newsroom. In October 1977, Franklin set up a sniper post outside a Richmond Heights synagogue. He fired 5 shots into a crowd of people in a parking lot following a bar mitzvah. 42-year-old Gerald Gordon was killed. Franklin escaped. He continued his killing spree for another 3 years. When he was finally captured and brought back to St. Louis, County Prosecutor Bob McCullough got the murder conviction in 1977 that sent Franklin to death row.
He picked out 2 people in the crowd. He didn't know them. He wasn't going after anyone in particular. According to him, he wanted to kill as many Jews as he could.
63-year-old Franklin admitted to numerous killings across the country.
His thinking was very logical. He decided, for crazy reasons, of course, that I'm going to kill Jews, I'm going to kill blacks. But he knew exactly what he's doing. He didn't just go out and shoot randomly.
Prosecutor McCullough told KMOX Franklin certainly earned the punishment he received.
White supremacist serial killer Joseph Franklin is dead. Michael Calhoun is following the developments from Bonne Terre.
Doug, just over 6 hours after originally scheduled, he was proclaimed to have been executed. His 4 witnesses left this morning at 4 in the morning during the long delay that was due to court challenges, the Supreme Court eventually having to clear the way. There were no witnesses for the victim. In the viewing gallery for press and state witnesses, it was dark until a guard pulled back the curtain to reveal Franklin on his back, his eyes closed, a sheet up to his neck. The lethal injection began at 6:07. He gulped a couple of times and also blinked, but for the most part was motionless. It was quiet in the gallery. The curtains were drawn shut after about 5 minutes, and Franklin was declared dead at 6:17. In a news conference afterwards, corrections officials say the execution proceeded as they had expected.